My name is Ira Sroll. I wrote this play, An Equal Right to Act, remembering the Rochester Women's Rights Convention of 1848. It is largely based on the proceedings of that convention. This was the second convention on women's rights, and it followed the Seneca Falls Convention by 2 weeks. The Seneca Falls Convention is so noteworthy because it was the very first, but the Rochester Convention is noteworthy because it was the first one to be chaired by a woman.
Friends, we present ourselves here before you as an oppressed class with trembling frames and faltering tongues. My name is Julie Kleinhans, and I play Abigail Bush the Younger, and she was voted to be the presiding officer at this convention, which was a huge deal at the time. That had never happened, where a woman would actually be presiding over a meeting with women and men together, which today happens all the time. We don't think twice about it. Back then it was pretty shocking, even among the women. Some of the women felt that it was not a good idea. They thought it was just a little too progressive, just a little too much. But Amy Post and Abigail Bush and others insisted that if we're going to do this, we can have a woman presiding at the meeting as well. And so she did, and it worked out fine.
It was changing things fundamentally to come up with the idea that women should be equal with men, have their own lives if they wanted, make their own decisions, be an equal part of the family. And this was not the way that everyone had been brought up for thousands of years.
This meeting took place back in the 1840s, so women at the time would never go anywhere without a man or without an escort. They could not vote, they could not hold property, they basically had no rights of their own.
Women were really considered the property of their fathers until they married, when they became the property of their husbands. And there's a line in the play that Elizabeth Cady Stanton says,
"A married woman has no legal existence, with no more rights than a slave on a southern plantation. She takes the name of her master, holds nothing, owns nothing, can bring no action in her own name."
And what that meant was that even if a woman came into a marriage with her own property, let's say she inherited a house from her parents, for instance, upon marrying, it all became the property of her husband. And nothing that a woman owned, not even the clothes on her back, truly belonged to her in the eyes of the law.
And for them to start from where they were and actually organize and make all this happen and get the ball rolling for this was pretty incredible.
So the original convention actually took well over a year to plan. But this Rochester Convention, this was planned on the spot. And then when they all got back to Rochester, it only took 2 weeks for them to gather the people. The women were so inspired. They were fired up and they were ready to go back to their home communities and have conventions there. And that Rochester was the first of those conventions. The Seneca Falls Convention was like the center of a spider web. And then the women all traveled out to their home communities, whether it was in other parts of New York or eventually into Ohio and Pennsylvania and Massachusetts and Vermont. The women would hold conventions in their own communities, and they would adopt the resolutions in the Declaration of Sentiments. That's the document that was drawn up at Seneca Falls, stating the belief in women's rights and women's right to the vote. And soon there was a big network of suffragists all throughout the entire Northeast, and it even spread out to the West. In fact, the Wyoming Territory was the first to give women the right to vote. It took many, many decades of organizing for the women to be taken seriously. It really took the First World War, when the men went off to war and the women stayed behind and did the jobs that the men had done before. And they kept the farms going and they kept the factories going. And that was what finally led to the federal government saying, okay, we're going to make this the law of the land.